Hi there, and welcome to your general Squarespace overview. This is just that overarching video. It's the same for every template you buy, so this one is not template specific, but this is for like if this is your first time inside of Squarespace. I'm just going to quickly walk you through all those really important elements that you need to know before getting started and just feeling lost. So once you get into your template, it'll look something like this. I'm going to get rid of my face here so that we can see better. It'll look something like this. So you'll see your template here to the right, and then you'll see some what I call back-end navigation here to your left. So on here, you can access your pages. That's where you're going to see all those pages. We'll get to that in a bit. The design tab, I'll have an entire video specifically dedicated to the design tab where you can access custom CSS as well as your site styles. These are your universal website settings, your fonts, your colors, all of those things that are universal throughout your website. Marketing, lots of fun stuff in here. I'm not personally going to dive too much into this. We have a wonderful marketing partner we're always happy to refer, but you can add a promotional pop-up, you can add an announcement bar. Those are two of the really easy ads, but you can always explore this a bit more on your own. Analytics is a great tool. You can always connect Google Analytics or any others, but you can just, again, feel free to look around in here. You can check out your traffic sources and how people are getting here, where they're coming from, all of that. This, of course, is not a live site, so we have none. Profiles, and you'll see if it's your first time in the site, you should be getting these pop-ups. They did just redo this back-end navigation. So even for me, who is in here every day, it's still slightly new. Profiles is something that is a bit new, but this is for if you were having like subscription-based e-commerce site, subscription-based, all that kind of thing. Site availability, we'll get to this, but this is really how we end up going live. Your site will automatically be set to private. At some point, you might want to change it to password protected, meaning people can see it as long as they have the password. This is valuable if you want people to review your site or if you want to view it in an incognito window, that kind of thing. Site settings, you're probably not going to do a ton here. In advanced is where you're going to get to things like external API keys. This is where you put your Google Analytics usernames, all kinds of stuff here. Your code injection, if you were to use other custom code, HTML, JavaScript. Lots of stuff happening here. For example, log in with the escape key. This is actually something I really like. So if you go to your website, pretend your domain is, this one is rukaphotography.com. You can actually click the escape button. And if you have access to, if you on your laptop are logged into Squarespace and in that Squarespace login, you have access to the back end of the website that you're on, it will log you right in. So that's really cool. Lots going on there. Help, self-explanatory. I won't dive into that. So that's kind of the general gist of your back end navigation. The next thing I like to show everyone is how to go in and out of full screen. So you'll see up here at the very top, you have your desktop view, you have your mobile view. We'll get to that a bit later. I'm also going to dive way more into that in separate videos, but this is how you toggle back and forth between the two. I do like to suggest really actually viewing your website on your phone. It sometimes can be a little different, not too much, but always, always great to double check. As you're editing, I always suggest going in and out of full screen. You can do that here. So anytime you make an edit, always important to view it in full screen. When you're out of full screen, things can change, not drastically, but just slightly. So like this button here, you can see how the overlap is pretty different. So just make sure to view things in full screen and, just as aesthetically, you're getting rid of this crazy, sidebar as well. Okay, so I'm going to dive really quick back into this design tab. So this is a place where I suggest just being very mindful. First, let me go into the custom CSS. I do have some custom CSS here. When you receive your template, you should not have any custom CSS already in place. It does require a higher level of subscription. I'll talk more about that. Again, there will be a video dedicated to upgrading your account and subscribing and all of that. But you will be provided with a CSS cheat sheet, which is super helpful. It has some amazing tips and tricks, some of which I actually have in here. in this current design I'm working on. So this is where all custom CSS goes. Site styles. This is where you're really going to spend a lot of time tweaking. So when you receive your template, it of course already has, we've chosen fonts and colors, and you may want to keep those things, which is totally cool. But if you want to make it a little bit your own, this is where you'll go. So in fonts, we can get really deep into this, so feel free to look around, but just know that everything you do here is universal. So if you go into headings, this is your heading font for the entire website. So you can see if I were to change it, you can see those headings change. And you can go to browse all fonts. Squarespace has, I would venture to guess, probably thousands. Many fonts. So you can totally change up your font. So you have your font family. So that's what your font is for your heading. The weight of the font. This one in particular only has one weight. Many have several. Style, again, this font in particular does not have like an italic style or anything, but sometimes they do. Line height, that's the space between the lines of text. And again, this is all universal, so every heading will have this setting. Letter spacing, text transform, this is if you wanted it all to be uppercase or automatically lowercase or automatically capitalized. And then here you get into your different heading sizes. So the way I build templates is each page you'll have a heading 1 that's usually up here in what we call the hero image. That's typically your biggest heading. Next, you'll have several heading 2s. So these typically would be your heading 2. On this particular site, I don't think I used a heading 3, but basically these are headings of decreasing sizes. This, I believe, is a heading 4. And you just use those, or this might be a heading 4. You use those just how you see fit throughout the site while still keeping the style really consistent. Okay, paragraph style, that is your body copy text, this here. So again, you're going to choose a font family that is consistent throughout all of your body copy, and I'll show you what this means on the page as well. You choose the weight, line height, etc. You have 3 paragraph styles as well, so different sizes. Buttons. So this is where you're setting your actual button style. This is kind of a faux button I made. We can talk about that later, but this here is your actual button style. So you're setting the font family again. You do, once again, have a primary button, a secondary button, and a tertiary button. In most of my templates, I'm using a consistent button style, so I'm mostly just using the primary button. But you can set these, of course, separately if you wanted different button styles throughout. So that is your button font. So this gets us slightly confusing in the design tab because you are editing your buttons in a couple different spots. I'll show you that. Miscellaneous there are just that, miscellaneous text throughout the site, really small things. I don't even have a great example, but this is not, basically this would be choose your body copy font here. That's what I do. This is just, you want it to match the style of your site, but it's not something really to worry about, just for anything you're not specifically setting. And then in assigned styles, it gets really, really detailed on everything. So when you set your body copy and your heading font, that will apply to everything else on the site in some type of way. You don't have to go in here and customize this. However, I always like to customize, for example, the navigation. One fun trick is you can click on stuff if you're in the right tab, like if you're in fonts, you can actually click on a font and it will typically, sometimes it messes up, but bring up what you're clicking on. So here I'm looking at my site navigation. Again, it's set to the paragraph style, but I might want to come in and customize and say, okay, I want this to be actually like a thicker weight. So that's where you customize really detailed font styles. Next are your colors. So you'll see up here when it loads that typically this is like a cute little, color grid. It's not loading right now, but you have your palette. So the color palette applies automatically throughout the site and you can change those things, but it will kind of automatically start adjusting when you do something new. So what I always suggest is having this first one is your lightest. So that typically is your white. You almost always need a white background of some sort, maybe not always, but you need white somewhere in the color palette. For fonts on overlay, you definitely need a white. I typically, for the second color, do a very, very light gray or really light tint of one of the brand colors. This is nice to use for backgrounds things like that. Then I personally typically do the two most primary, like a primary and maybe a secondary brand colors here. And then the last one tends to be the brand black. So in this case, it's not a full black, it's a really dark gray. So that's kind of the order of which these make sense, because they do apply. It's hard to explain, but they do kind of automatically apply, and I'll show you how to change everything. So once you've applied your color palette, so if you change that for your brand, great. You'll start seeing when you're in here that the template has each section. So it's kind of built out in these sections. This section, the background is technically called darkest one. So if you wanted to change anything in this section, you would need to change the colors in darkest one. So find that, click here. There has been a bug where it doesn't actually take you where you click. So you just got to go back and choose it again. That's just a recent bug. Hopefully it goes away soon. And once you're in here, you can find, okay, like heading 1, that's called extra large. So if you decided, okay, I want this to be turquoise, that's where, and you can also go to custom and put in a different color if, this is only 5 colors. So if your color palette, and we're using a lot for whites, grays, and blacks. So if your color palette has more colors, you can, do that. You can change the opacity here of something that's already in. Under custom, you can flip between hex, RGB, HSL, put in any other colors that you need. So just like before, you can actually click on things as well, and it's pretty good at choosing the right things. So yes, this is bright 2, we're in bright 2. It's chosen your heading large. So if I wanted to get crazy and, change that color, I could. Oh, really good point is this back button. It's your best friend. That is a semi-new feature. You can always hit the back button or the forward button. If you do something crazy, you can always go to discard changes. You probably saw how I got to site stays earlier. If you're in edit mode on the page, you can always get back into site styles here. You just need to make sure to save everything. So that's the general gist of your colors. It does get a little complex, of course, because again, you do have these different background colors. So you need to make sure things are set, how you like them throughout, and you'll get used to all of that. So for example, here we have lightest 1. Again, it didn't choose the right one. There we go. And say I want to change this button color. You can just click on there, make sure it's still on lightest 1. I can say, okay, I actually want, and this is universal, remember. So if I were to change this, every button, every primary button on lightest 1 is now going to be this color. So just be aware when you're changing it. The design tab is where it gets probably the most complex. I did not mean to leave. Okay. Other things, this is pretty quick animation. So you can choose some automatic animations. Basically, as you're scrolling down the page, things will appear on the page in certain ways. So feel free to play around with those. Spacing, this again gets pretty complex, but this is kind of the margins on your site. If you wanted to play around with, how much space is between the edge and where your content starts. Buttons. Okay, so this is where your button styling lives. It is really confusing because they also have your button font style here. So it's pretty, I don't know why they have it in both places. So here you can set a primary, secondary, and tertiary button. I'll show you how that's used later, but you set your font, you set the shape, you can do fill or outline. You can do custom corners, all kinds of stuff. You can edit the spacing around it. So if this is overwhelming, primary, secondary, tertiary, or if you don't want to set them all, you can apply to all button types. So you're like, okay, primary is great, apply to all button types. And you can edit colors still in the design tab, but yeah, okay, image blocks. These, to be honest, I don't use a ton. You can with images, these photos on the page, I'll show you. You can do those in certain type of ways to where they basically have a caption with them. It's not something widely used, so I wouldn't really worry. I'm going to discard changes because I may have done something crazy, but you would save if you liked your changes. Another important thing is your browser icon. You cannot see my browser tab. Of course, it's not loading, but this is where you have that favicon. So with Squarespace, you automatically have this little Squarespace box in your navigation tab, but you can customize that. So I just upload a very small, must be square for the ratio to look correct. And that shows there in your little navigation tab. You've probably noticed that websites have a little icon beside their name. So that's how that works. Okay. Other things can happen here. Feel free to poke around. Those are the main things. Your social sharing. So you can upload a specific photo for when you share anything on social. your 404 page, if someone ends up on a page that doesn't exist, you could custom design that page. These are more niche things, so I won't go into them, but feel free to poke around. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is the header and footer. So header, here, this is where your navigation lives. Again, sometimes when you, so let me discard again. When you go into edit, so on any page, let me actually go click on pages real quick. You can see the navigation. So I'll go ahead and show you this really quickly. It's pretty standard to put the home page under not linked. All that means is it's not showing up as a home link here in the navigation, because it's very universally known to click the logo to get back to home. If that is not something you like, you can simply click and drag and look, bam, you got home in the main navigation. Contact, I'm actually using a button, so I'll show you how that works. But you can just drag the stuff around. You can add pages here. I typically, personally, I'm a designer, so I do blank pages and start from scratch, but you can totally choose collections, page layouts, and start from there as well. You can also duplicate an existing page by clicking the gear, clicking duplicate. So if you're like, I really like my about page, I want to kind of use that style, you totally can. What else? Let me hop into here. I'll show you the header and the footer, and then I will keep moving on. So, okay, the header, once you're in here, you'll see when you hover, it says edit site header. So this is another thing that is universal. If you make an edit to the header on the home page, it will apply to everything on the site. In here, this is where you set your site title and logo. So after you buy your template, you will of course have a different name than this. So you set your site title here. It's important to do that because it will show up in your navigation tab, like on Google, all of those things. You replace your logo here. You can play around with the logo height right here, your mobile logo height. We can show that more. You can actually change your mobile logo as well if you wanted a different logo on mobile. Elements, this is where I've turned the button on, so I could turn it on and off, but I like to have that button for my biggest call to action, which is usually contact. I've said let's work together, and I've told it to link to the contact page. So all linking on Squarespace works the same, whether it's a hyperlink, a button, just anything you're linking to, you'll see this gear consistently. You can link to an email, a web address, so somewhere else on the internet, a file. So a lot of times people do freebies, PDF downloads, things like that, or a page on the website, which is most common. So once you start typing, it will start populating pages on the site. Click it. If you're linking anywhere outside of your own website, I always suggest opening a new tab. In this case, we don't need to worry about that. You would click save, but I canceled. Social links, you can toggle that on. You can go to edit social links and you would just start, for example, if I put in my Instagram handle, hit enter, you'll see that automatically populate here. Social links are universal. So if you have them in your header and also your footer and also on your contact page, if you update them in one place, it will update everywhere. So if you added a new one, anything like that, you can change the size, you can change what it looks like, all of that. Language switch is new. It does require an extension to be added, but it's really cool. It's a nice way for people to be able to switch between languages on your website. And then cart, if you have an e-commerce site, you would want your cart to be on. Okay, style. This is a little bit complex. I do have a really, really great Learn post. So on ajmexperience.com, if you go to our Learn page, I have a post detailing my favorite ways to style a header. But there are a lot of options here. So this is one where I, might suggest sticking with what was chosen with the template, but feel free to dive in. Things can get a little crazy, especially with dynamic, because it's kind of adapting to other things you set on your site. I won't get too much into this, but you have the opacity of the header. You can see that changing color, the color of your navigation links. I've told it to blur the background in this case, so behind the header is blurred. You can add a border, you can add a drop shadow, a lot of options I won't go into there because it is pretty complex, but you have the option. I always like to do fixed headers. So this means it's following you down the page as you scroll. I'll show you that in 1 second. Okay, toggle over here. This is your desktop settings. You could actually change your header layout. You could, move your nav over here. You can move it to the middle, so you can totally change that up. I tend to keep this full. You could do inset. It just brings it in even with where your content ends. Vertical padding, I typically do pretty as small as possible, basically. Element spacing, that's the spacing between different elements. So not your links, but like your button and your social links and your links, and then your actual link spacing is here. You can see that moving. Mobile styles are separate. So header layout, you can choose a different header layout for mobile. The overlay, that's when you click on that hamburger menu, what does that look like? So you can change the colors, you can change the alignment, link spacing, etc. Menu icon, you can make it 3 lines, you can make it a plus, etc. So that's all there. Okay. I will get out of that, go back into desktop, and I'm going to discard changes. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of the header, and you'll see what I meant about the sticky header. As you scroll, it's following you and always staying stuck to the top. One last thing, so I'm going to go all the way to the footer because this is also universal. So if you click edit footer, if you edit it anywhere, you are editing it everywhere. But once you're in here, this acts just like on-page editing, which I'm going to show you soon. So you can edit everything in the footer is completely editable. You can just move things around and use it like a regular page. Just know that it is universal. Okay, so that is your header and your footer. Okay, so on-page editing, again, I'm going to jump back into edit. This can get pretty complex. I will dive way more into this in each individual video, but right now I'm giving you the basics. So how this works is, it's always hard to figure out where to start. I'll start with what's already on the page. Any text that's already there, this is just simple text boxes. You can type in them just like you would in a Word document. You'll see once you're in the text box, you do have those options for what we've already set, our heading 1s, our heading 2s. So you're not manually setting every single font every time. You're just choosing something that's already set. You can bold things, italicize, etc. There's some other settings in here, but I'll kind of leave it at the basics. Very similar to a Word document, bullets, numbering, all of that. One thing I always like to show is setting a hyperlink. If you wanted to hyperlink something, highlight it, click the hyperlink, just like you would in an email. This acts the exact same as I showed you before. You click the gear and you choose, where you're wanting to link to. That's kind of the basics of editing text. Existing photos on the page. So if I click on a photo, click the pencil, I could delete this photo, upload a new one. Pretty simple. Over here in design, I always like, because the photos probably don't fit exactly in the frame that you're creating, I tend to do fill. You can see that photo filling the whole frame I've created. You could set a border radius, meaning you could curve the edges of your photo just by adding, like a 10 would add a slight curve to the edge of the photo. Lots of options there in the design tab. You could allow it to open in a light box. So if it was a photo you really wanted people to see up close, if they click on it, it would pop up larger in a light box. Lots happening, so feel free to dive into that. You can edit technically in here. It's not something I typically use. Okay, from photos, I'm going to dive into backgrounds. So backgrounds here, you can see this is this big full width background. So in each section, you'll see you're prompted to kind of edit that particular section. If I clicked edit section here, again, you have a lot happening. So this Fluid Engine Squarespace is the new version of the editor, and it's really great, but it has a little bit of a learning curve. So you can set your row count, meaning how many rows of these blocks that you have. You can set the gap between them. This gets pretty complicated, not something I really suggest doing too much with if you're not really familiar with it. You can set the height of your page, so basically that space above and below those blocks where your content can live. Alignment, do the blocks at the top, do they sit in the middle? Again, this gets pretty complex, so wouldn't get too crazy there. What you will most likely need is changing your background photo. So that's here under background. You could delete, you would upload a new one. Just make sure you're paying attention to kind of that ratio of the photo. So this is a very, wide horizontal photo. It's probably pretty close to a 16:9 ratio. So if you uploaded a vertical photo here, wouldn't work great. So that's one thing to note. You can upload a video. You could do a video background. You can both upload it or you could link it. So you could upload a file. You could also add from a link from YouTube or Vimeo. There's a lot of options below that. You can filter it. You can do a different playback speed. Something I don't think really I don't know anyone who uses, but you can kind of create these custom art backgrounds. They have updated them and made them more applicable. They had some pretty funky stuff before. You can go into here and start doing it completely yourself, or you can click shuffle and just see, what it starts coming up with. And it does kind of lightly move. There's some cool stuff. You could do something cool. It's not that widely used that I know of, but good to know about. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and discard those changes and I'll jump back into edit mode. So those are your backgrounds. One thing else to note, so background, next is colors. So anything, for example, that has this photo and it has white text over it, the photo itself is going to need a slight dark overlay so that we can see the text. So if I were to choose bright one is first the background. So basically the background behind the photo is white and the colors are not set correctly. So if I were to choose lightest one, well, I'm using lightest one on my really light backgrounds and I need that dark color there. So it doesn't make sense here. So again, it gets a little complex, but you do want to make sure you have that dark color because then in the background, I'm going to jump backwards a little bit. When you upload a photo, you do have the overlay opacity here. So you can see if I had no overlay, you couldn't read the white text. This is where that dark overlay comes into play. Okay, so throughout you can edit sections, change the colors. These you can see more simply because we don't have a full background. So you could simply, change the colors and this makes a bit more sense. I have some kind of, just custom fun elements here like this shape. You can click on the shape, you can click change the colors, edit that there, change the roundness, make it a different shape. This text box acts just like we talked about up here. One thing to note, and I do this accidentally all the time, if you backed one style into another, it's going to take that style. You can always undo it or just be like, oops, I need to change this to a paragraph 3 or whatever. So everything else in the page is going to act pretty similar. So yeah, you can just change out any of these photos. You can change out these colors. Again, once you go in the design tab and add your own color scheme, it will automatically take those colors throughout the site. So you will need to kind of make some adjustments from there. Okay, down here, these buttons, you'll just need to go in and, connect your, for example, if this was your template, you would need to connect your Instagram here. This block, so I'll go into more into like what blocks are, but if you had something like this on your template, the social block, anything you click on, you'll see this pencil icon. So it's pretty easy to figure out, how to edit. Click the pencil icon, you would need to actually connect an account and this could pre-populate with your Instagram posts. Again, section background here, you can see I had the background photo. If it was full color, you couldn't see anything. So the color I've set for this page is, of course, it's not showing it. It's probably lightest one. And then the overlay opacity I have turned all the way up. All right, I will discard those changes. Couple other things I want to show you are common blocks, duplicating sections, things like that. So real quick, you can duplicate sections. So if I were like, hey, I really like this hero image, I want to duplicate it. And then you can actually move it around the page. So you're not having to like recreate things over and over. You can remove that section. You can also favorite sections. So I could say, okay, I really like this and I'm going to use this on other pages. So I'm going to favorite it. So when you add new sections, you have tons of options. You can add a blank section, which is what I typically do. You can also go in and be like, okay, well, I want services, and some of Squarespace's templates are crazy like this. But you can find some good stuff in here. So you can start from there. You can also go to your saved sections and say, okay, yeah, I want to add this one. So that's really nice is you're not having to rebuild things over and over. If you wanted, for example, to take your template, add a whole new page, you can either duplicate the whole page like I showed or kind of piece it together using these saved sections. Okay. In this blank section, I'm going to show you the most common blocks. So that's how you kind of build a page, is adding those sections. But adding blocks, so if you click add block, this is how you really build the elements of your website. So of course, the most common will be like text, images, videos, buttons, things like that. So for your text box, once you drag this around, you can see that grid that you've set or that I set. You can just simply drag things, start typing in there, be like, this is a heading 2. I want this centered. add a block. Say you want to do some icons with some text. So you can move your image. I like to kind of start in the center. Okay, so say I would want my icon about that size. I'm going to add some more text because this icon needs, a heading, etc. You can just move it around, kind of perfect your spacing. Sometimes there gets to be extra grid at the bottom. Just you can always drag that around. You can take you can highlight things like this, move them around together. So that's really nice. My favorite feature ever is that you can both align things, which doesn't apply here because they're centered. It does still align things. You can center align. So there's a lot of cool stuff here with alignment. You can also duplicate. So I'm not having to sit here and rebuild like my photo text. You can just highlight, duplicate, drag it, make sure your spacing between everything is the same. So a much easier way to build out the page. You can see I have some extra grid. It just kind of happens. Sometimes it is a little finicky about kind of making things equal, but so that's kind of basics. Buttons. So, you could add a button. So if we want to say, okay, we want this to be able to go somewhere, and then you can get really specific about the spacing. So your fonts, you can, like right now it's top aligned, you can center align this, move your button down, give it some more breathing room. There's a lot of things you can get really specific with. I won't get too much into it. So you saw images, buttons, you can add video. That you can, just like before for the backgrounds, you can either upload a file or you can embed a link from YouTube or Vimeo. Audio, like you could, put in an embed link from like a podcast, a forms. You will see this on your contact page on your template. We will definitely have a form. Isn't this page looking beautiful? One thing I like to show for the form really quick, you can name the form, you can change the text on the button. Edit form fields. Here's where all your form fields are. You can click into each, change the label, make it required, not required, delete it. You actually delete it here. Clicking edit. Add field. There's so many options. You can get really custom with your forms. Under design, you can actually make your form a light box. So you can change the text that says on there. Basically, they would click on the button and the form would pop up on the page rather than having the form sitting on the page. Storage, this is where it's connected. This is super important. You want that to be going to either your email, your MailChimp. You can connect it to like a Google Drive, but typically to an email. So many things we can go into here. Newsletter, so people can sign up for your newsletter. This, of course, has its own set of design options. Lines, I use those a lot for, just dividing things up. You can change the color of the line based on what background it's on in the design tab. Quote, map, all kinds of stuff here. So if you ever need to do custom code on the page, your more social links, accordions are great. This is where you can put your text in kind of this accordion style. If you click the plus button, it expands. So go in here, go into content, and this is where you would put all of your content. You can add more items. Just a great way to condense space if you have a lot of content. So much options. Shapes. So that's how I did this background here. You can add shapes if you wanted to like box things in. One thing I need to show is everything can be, so let's say I put this on top of this. You can move things forward and behind using these. So if I were to, put this accordion on top of this shape, I would need to move it above the shape. Okay, lots and lots here. Those are the main ones, but there's lots of options. Let me definitely discard all those crazy changes. Okay, that is, most of the common blocks. Forms, I think that is everything. Again, the basics, there's a big learning curve on getting, becoming a pro on Squarespace, but I think that should be just the absolute basics of everything you need to know to get started once you get your new template. You, of course, should watch the other videos that dive into more detail on each, but those are the Squarespace basics.